Good morning, good afternoon. On behalf of the ASEM Education Secretariat, I would like to wish you a very warm welcome to our very first 2021 online workshop. I'm Emilie de Geldre and together with my colleague Nadia Reinders, I coordinate the ASEM Education Secretariat, which is currently hosted by Belgium. We are delighted to see so many of you took time out of their busy agendas to join us today. Over 60 people have registered for today's event. This workshop is the first of a series of 4 thematic workshops in the framework of the ASEM Education Strategy 2030, to which many of you have already contributed, so thank you for that. As mentioned in the invitation, the objective of the workshop will be twofold. On the one hand, we would like to showcase relevant Asia-Europe and ASEM education initiatives, and on the other, we're hoping to collect valuable input for the action plan, which focuses on the implementation of the 2030 ASEM strategy, and is hence meant to make sure the strategy paper doesn't remain wishful thinking, but leads to concrete actions, activities, and projects. Today, we're going to focus on the first strategic objective identified for the next decade and address the following question. How can the ASEM education process, how can ASEM education partners and stakeholders contribute to creating more transparency and mutual understanding on recognition, validation, and quality assurance? We're going to take a closer look at how these 3 aspects fit together and can help to promote and support inter-regional cooperation, mobility, and exchanges, as well as allow for more flexible learning pathways. I would like to encourage you to be as proactive as possible. Please use the chat box to interact with us and our distinguished speakers. Don't hesitate to ask for the floor during Q&A sessions or comment in the chat. There is no such thing as a stupid question. I'd like to end this brief introduction by wishing you a pleasant workshop and exciting discussions. Please let us prove together that despite the current sanitary crisis, meaningful exchanges are still possible. Without further ado, I would now like to give the floor to our keynote speaker, Boreen Chakroon, Director of the UNESCO Division for Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems, for what I'm sure will be an extremely inspiring and instructive keynote. Boreen, thank you again for accepting our invitation and being with us today. The floor is yours.
I would like also to thank the ASEM Secretariat for the invitation to join this meeting and to present some directions regarding the mutual and transparency of recognition of and validation and quality of qualifications and credentials. Dear colleagues, in a normal time, we should be meeting in face-to-face. We should be probably certain about what will be happening in the next month, if not the next years, and probably would have a much more stable perspective regarding how we can reinforce the transparency and the mutual understanding of the qualification. But we are not in that context. We are in a protracted crisis with the implications on societies, on economies, and on individuals. That's why in my presentation today, I would like, first of all, to start with the big picture. Where are we? What is influencing the landscape? And what we should take into account in thinking about the qualification, the validation, the recognition, the cooperation across regions and countries. I would like also to share with you the state of the arts in terms of the global landscape, both combining the pre-COVID situation and some of the elements that are emerging from the crisis and the implication on the credentialing, and potentially, and this is part of more reflection and engaging discussion rather than giving straitjacket solutions. What are the scenarios that I think would be important to consider going forward? So let me start first of all with the big picture. What is important today for all of us, and how we can take into consideration the development and disruption we have been seeing during the last year, and we continue facing, unfortunately, now and probably in the next few months. First of all, let me share with you the most recent data. This is something that we are publishing in reality tomorrow, but we are preparing for it. Globally, we have lost in average 100 school days because of the COVID crisis. And of course, the situation is different across regions because of the pandemic, because of the policy decisions regarding closing education institution, be it primary, secondary, tertiary education, and of course, technical and vocational education and training institution who are also deeply affected by the crisis. We are in deep learning crisis, and it's important that we don't neglect it and that we think that everything can continue as it was before March or before February last year. We know also that in most countries, there is an effort to move to remote learning with different situations across regions and contexts. Of course, the most affected are the less developed economies with the capacities to organize remote learning that were weak and resilient to respond to the crisis. But we know that this situation is also different within the countries, and that equity and inclusion, particularly for the most marginalized group, is very important. We also know that the situation has affected examination and certifications. And according to a survey we conducted by end of June, we have seen that different countries were adopting different situation. We surveyed around 120 countries here, and some of the countries continued planning the examination and certification as planned. Others were disrupting their examination processes. Some were organizing modalities for health protection and organizing distancing students, but also some have postponed, rescheduled examination, or even canceled high-stake examination, with implication in terms of the certification, but also in terms of the learning pathways and articulation, for example, between secondary and higher education and tertiary education. But the crisis is having also a deep impact on the financing of education and training. And we have been doing some estimate according to the level of the crisis and the economic crisis that the countries are facing. And we can see that we will be losing around 330 billion less if we go to the worst scenario, and the global economy will shrink by around 5%. So it's very important to see how much the education and training systems are being disrupted by the COVID, and how the certification situation will be also affected. In many countries, particularly the most advanced economies, there is an important stimulus package that are being put in place to recover the economy and to invest in the recovery and resilience building. But unfortunately, according to our data, again, the allocation to education is very thin. It's around 0.7 out of the overall amount that are allocated to the stimulus packages. So education is not getting the share or the attention that the policymaker should have in the context of the recovery as well. But of course, we need to be aware about the disruption of economies, labor market, and societies in the context of the crisis, and what does it mean for the certification. Our ILO colleagues are estimating that we are losing around 500 million jobs because of the crisis. We know before the crisis that the polarization of the labor market was emerging, in particularly in advanced economy, but also in emerging economies. And we know that the informality is not shrinking. Those have implications on education and training, but also on the certification, on the way we recognize learning, on the way we recognize skills and validate skills, and for whom we shouldn't miss. We know again, according to ILO, that the unemployment rate will remain high, and that the world average should be around 5.8%. Of course, depending on regions, the situation can be even worse. We have also conducted the global survey together with ILO, Asian Development Bank, the European Commission, the World Bank. We were looking at how companies are responding to the crisis and what they are saying about how they will deal with the skills in the disrupted economies and labor market. What is the most, I would say, key feature there is that the work-based learning has been deeply affected, and many companies, around 36% of the surveyed companies, have stopped paying wages for or stipend to apprentices and interns. So the learning opportunity in the workplace is being disrupted as well. Even before the crisis, we knew that inequality is one of the major concerns, and that if we don't address the inequality challenges, we will be in a trajectory where there will be more rich who will get the wealth, higher wealth and larger wealth, and that the poorest will have much less access to resources, and that the richest 85 people have as much combined wealth as the poorest 3.6 billion around the world. So inequality across countries and within countries is one of the major challenges. But inequality also, we have seen it in the COVID in terms of access to internet. And the right to education became jeopardizing or depending on the right to access to connectivity. But we know that across the countries and within the countries, access to internet is uneven. And in some regions, access is much higher than others. But within the countries, rural areas are much less deserved with the connectivity. Poor and disadvantaged group have less access to connectivity or to devices at home. And that is, of course, affecting the learning opportunities and their capacity to engage in learning, lifelong learning, and getting recognition for their skills and qualifications. But this is coming in addition and exacerbating a learning crisis that we knew before the COVID-19 outbreak. We knew that in many economies, the number of students who will finish secondary school will be much lower than what we would like to have and what we set in the SDG 4. Even in the most advanced economies and the high-income countries. We knew also that learning doesn't happen systematically, and that children, when they are in the schools, or youth when they are in the schools, they can complete but don't acquire the skills that they are supposed to acquire. And that this happens in even the most advanced economies and societies. So access doesn't mean learning outcomes, and this has implication again on the skills and recognition of credentials and certifications. What we have done at UNESCO, we organized the Global Education Meeting end of October with the head of states, head of government, around 70 ministers, and we adopted a recommendation that focuses on 4 key areas. One is schools reopening, and that means that opening education and training institutions first, of course, depending on the health situation in the countries, considering teachers as a frontline workers, emphasizing the importance of skills development, be it for work, also for upskilling and reskilling workers, and focusing on narrowing the digital divide within and across countries. So let me move to the next item that I wanted to share with you. I wanted just to emphasize that we cannot discuss the credentialing, we cannot discuss the validation without taking into account the context within which we are operating, and that will impact the normal that we used to have before the crisis, and will define the new normal. What is the credential landscape today? First, we have done quite important work looking at the global. We developed it together with ETF, CDFOP, and other key stakeholders, the global inventory on regional and national qualification framework. We developed an important work on digital credentialing, and this is informing a bit some of the element of my presentation. Let me recall a bit the key findings of the global inventory on qualifications. We have seen that the regional frameworks are evolving, and the European qualification framework, the Asian qualification framework, reference framework are becoming operational. We have seen that qualification framework are part of the UN Education 2030 agenda, the SDG 4, the EU agenda. We have seen also that there are important changes, internationalization, migration, mobility, learning across borders that are defining a bit the way we look at the qualification and the way we recognize qualification. We also identified the importance of digital technologies in this context, and the importance of the quality assurance in driving the qualifications framework. We also have seen the development in terms of regional qualification framework, be it in South African Development Community, the ASEAN, European Qualification Framework, the Caribbean, the Transnational Qualification Framework, the Gulf countries qualification framework, the Pacific Register, and other initiative at regional level. So there is this important national reforms of qualification, regional interventions related to qualification framework and regional qualification framework that are operating. We also important to recognize the new generation of regional convention on recognition of qualification, particularly on higher education, in particular the Lisbon Convention, of course, but we have the Tokyo Convention that is now already entered into force, the Addis Ababa Convention for Africa that entered into force, and the Latin American Caribbean Regional Convention that we adopted in July 2019. A very important good news was by end of 2019, the adoption of the Global Convention on the Recognition of Higher Education Qualification. We have already 2 member states that have ratified the convention, but obviously we need 20 countries to for the Global Convention to we need 20 countries to ratify for the Global Convention to enter into force. So I will call on all member states joining this meeting to accelerate pace to join the Global Convention, because that's what will make it real and will help enhancing the mobility of students and learners across regions. Some of the elements that are, I think, important, and they are important for our discussion today, is that there is still lack of reference to learning outcomes, including in the most advanced convention like the Lisbon Convention. In a survey we have conducted with the Council of Europe, we have seen that, and as you see in the graph, the learning outcomes are still used, I would say, not the most important criteria for recognizing the qualifications, and that the status of the awarding institution, the type of awarding institution, the list of courses, and other aspects are more important than the learning outcomes, as you can see. So there is a path to I would say, to ensure that the learning outcomes become the common language that we use internationally to recognize qualifications and skills within and across borders. But we are also in the era of 4.0, Industry 4.0, VET or TVET 4.0, higher education 4.0, and all is related to the digital economy and its impact on the demand for skills, on qualification, and on the way we define and develop qualification and skills, and we recognize them. We have seen some important development before and during the crisis. more efforts to develop micro-credentials to adapt to the crisis, particularly for in companies, but also within universities, tertiary education, and vocational training institution. We have a range of stakeholders that are coming to the market, if I can say so, or coming to the ecosystem. In particular, the edtech industry, just to mention an organization like LinkedIn, but many other organizations that are engaging in the credentialing landscape. There is an important effort on the individual pathways and learning pathways, and Emily was referring to that. In some cases, also supported by artificial intelligence and other technologies. An important attention to digital learners' records, to the different type of credentialing, and let me use the term of credentials jungle with a quite very difficult situation and transparency challenges and quality assurance challenges. But also a very important aspect is about the privacy and security and the ownership of learners' record, and I will come back to that. We have seen also an important effort on building trust on the credentials by using technologies like the blockchain. And this is something that is happening. I'm putting here Malta, but obviously many countries, Italy, US, and other countries have been now using blockchain to secure the certification and ensure their mobility. And this is an important aspect that we have to consider as well. Badges, but with a very important data challenge that we are facing. I'm sharing here the data of 2018, but today, when we try to have a global perspective on the badges and all this type of credentials, it's very hard to have a trustful data and trustful monitoring of the situation. And this is something that I hope we can discuss in the meeting today. So what is the future? Of course, I have no silver bullet, and I'm not that skilled occult person, but I would like to share with you some perspective based on our analysis of the situation globally. I think we have to consider different scenarios, and first of all, what will be the element of the new normal in post-COVID that I think are important for us to consider? One is that we have been speaking about lifelong learning in different settings and different situations, but in reality, this has been rather sometimes a rhetoric. But during the crisis, we have seen that there are different modalities, different paces of learning anytime, anywhere, but not for everybody. And I mentioned already the challenge in terms of connectivity, for example. But the multiple sites and learning in different situations is an important, probably a feature of the new normal. The partnership dimension is also important. We have seen a shift or a move from the periphery to the center of the, let me call them the edtech industry, from Zoom to Google to Microsoft, but also startups that have been engaging in the education system and ecosystem. And this, of course, has implication in terms of the local ecosystems, the country sovereignty, the national identities, and this is something that probably we'll need to discuss as well in our debate today. Data, the importance of real-time data and for decision making, and the rise, for example, of data analytics, the concern regarding data privacy and security of learners. This is something that emerged as part of the COVID. It was there, but it has been, I would say, revealed further in the context of the COVID. The importance of learning outcomes and the changes in terms of assessment. We have seen new modalities of assessment, online assessment, for example, in some countries, looking at the changes and reform of high-stake exams, considering different ways of access to tertiary education, for example. This is something that is important. And of course, as I said earlier, the digital credentialing, micro-credentialing, stacking processes, and interoperability and digital ID that have been emergent. So probably those are elements that we will get in the new normal, and we will need to take this into consideration. see I'm blocked. Sorry, I see that I have a, oh, okay. Maybe just to say that until now we have had two streams that were not necessarily communicating, but I can see that they are now converging, and there will be more in the future. One is the national reform of qualifications, the regional convention, regional qualification framework, transnational qualification framework, and a movement that is going in parallel on digital credentialing, badges, e-portfolio, online certification, digital repositories of credentials, learner data records, and other streams that are driven by the technology. And those streams have been, let me say, moving in parallel, but I can see that they are now converging. And I would like to show a bit what are the scenarios that I think could be interesting to look at. There is a one conservative scenario is that we'll continue with the institutional qualification framework, highly regulated qualification system, strong role of government and institution, very well established quality assurance framework. That's probably part of the old normal, but it might continue in different ways and different contexts. There is more radical, I would say, scenario where, let me call it a disruptive credentialing, where we can see more mass uniqueness, and I will come back to this concept, a strong role of the tech industry, probably new generation of quality assurance modalities, and an engagement that is different than what we used to have. Maybe a scenario that is in between, which is more pluralistic, more public-private partnership, and a digital credentials that become a mainstream, but with I would say, a more a public-private partnership dimension that is stronger and not necessarily only market-driven, as it can be in this third scenario on disruptive credentialing. These are some thinking that I wanted to share with you, and I have been discussing this with several colleagues even before the COVID, but the COVID has accelerated a bit those scenarios, I believe. Maybe as part of the discussion is, of course, the interoperability and the credential adaptability or fluidity, if I can use the term. And I can see that there are 5 conditions for this credential fluidity. First of all, the interoperability within and across technology system and certifications, learners' responsibilities, right and ownership, taxonomies of learning outcomes that are understandable and across regions and countries, probably smart investment in technologies, and something that is very important for UN organization and for UNESCO is multilateralism, having international standards, a right-based approach, respecting the sovereignty of countries, and developing community of practices that will be important. I see these as 5 fundamental conditions for credential adaptability and fluidity, and I hope that this will be discussed by my fellow panelists as well. Maybe let me finish with what I call the mass uniqueness, and this is not a term that I have coined. It has been coined by the word skills development and the word skills competition, but I want to use it for our purpose today. I believe that we are massive, we have to engage in massive lifelong learning, but each of us is unique in her or his learning pathways, and that the systems, the credentialing, the new development that we have to consider have to take this into consideration and allow for a dynamic and lifelong learning record of individuals' learning and work experiences and achievement that can be verified instantly, that can be shared and easily with the education institution and employers. This can be supported by, of course, artificial intelligence and other technologies. But it should offer lifelong learning opportunities for all, an infinite set of possible interventions, which is more learner-centered and offering different learning pathways for skilling, reskilling, upskilling, and matching with the demand from the labor market and demand for individuals. So this mass uniqueness has to take into account that we need to reach scale, but that each of us will have a unique learning pathway and a unique career, and that's how the system has to have to cater for. And we see this happening, for example, in Australia with the My Equals platform, and other countries, the Europass as well in Europe, and other initiatives globally. Let me finish with an interesting work that has been published by the White House. The White House is changing now, and I don't want to enter into politics, but obviously there are some good news. But I found that the initiative related to learning and employment record in the US is interesting, and the criteria that have been used for key qualities for learning and employment record could be considered for our discussion. One is transparency of the learning and work records, their relevance. Equity and inclusion should be at the heart of this. Privacy and security, the capacity to verify, the portability of these learning and work records, the interoperability, and the capacity to share, and enabling the learners to, and the right of learners to share their records based on their decision, and to permit and access to their data according to their own needs. So these are elements that I think are key qualities for learning and employment record, but they are key qualities as well for recognition, validation, and quality of skills and credentials recognition. Thank you very much, and I hope I have not been very long. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chakroun, for this very comprehensive and forward-looking presentation. I think, yeah, it's a very important basis to start our discussions with the panel experts, and afterwards in the interactive sessions. I would like to open the floor now to all the participants to ask some questions to Mr. Chakroun. I'm having a look to the chat box, because I've asked already a little bit earlier if there are any questions, or you can also just raise your hand and grab your microphone. Herman, please.
That was by coincidence, but anyway, I can
Okay.
ask Borhene nevertheless. Borhene, could you please indicate in what way UNESCO may drive this? You gave a very compelling overview of all the challenges, but what will your unit be doing here, just in a few bullet points?
Do you want me to respond, or you would like to
Yes,
take
you
other
can
questions?
respond immediately. Maybe
Okay, yeah,
other people can already add some questions meanwhile, or think about a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to Herman for his question. Let me say that there are three ways that UNESCO is considering to act. Part of it is related to its mandate and based also on the member states' decision. One, the importance of normative instrument, I think, continue to be important, and we need to consider. Is operating, of course, the conventions related to higher education, but also continuing the important work we started on the recognition of skills and qualification of vocational education and training certification, and on work like the World Reference Levels work that we are doing, work that we are doing together with other organizations like ILO, CEDEFOP, OECD, ETF on skills and qualification recognition. Including for refugees and migrants. So that's one dimension that will continue. The second, obviously, and this is a critical aspect, I believe, for our discussion today, the interoperability is emerging as a major challenge. UNESCO is not a technology organization, but we are able to define what will be the guidelines, the direction that we need to take internationally to smooth and enhance the interoperability across technology systems, not by regulating technologies, because that's not our mandate, but more on what will be the principles that protect the learner's rights and data, that offers opportunities for people to move and have this credential fluidity that I mentioned earlier, and potentially agree internationally on some common principles. The last piece is about monitoring and evaluation. Uh, UNESCO has a mandate to collect data on education and training. Of course, the data on certification is much more complicated, but I think that's an important effort that we will need to make internationally to ensure capacities to monitor this situation and to advance the dialogue, the multilateral dialogue that I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chakroun. I see that Therese has raised her hand. Please, Therese.
Yes, I have. Hello, everybody. Good morning, and hello, Mr. Chakroun. Thank you very much for this quite inspiring presentation, and I particularly appreciate that also the way you put this focus on lifelong learning, which is really the crucial challenge of the near future, but also of the present, I would say, and the way it could also transform and act as a factor for transforming education systems. I have a question, which is more like also a reflection for all of us to have on what you relating the perspectives for the future that you just explained with the focus you had at the beginning of your presentation about inclusiveness, so social inclusion and equity, and how to basically build up, if you could share your thought about how to build up this let's say global ecosystem that would be equitable but also inclusive towards all and in all countries. We all know that for example, driving and processing big data systems or artificial intelligence is not exactly at the same level in all countries, and in some countries, because of the crisis, we have even witnessed challenges in accessing through internet to classes, to material, etc. So how do you envisage this future that you just described in a way that equity and inclusiveness across the board could be supported? And of course, as we are in the ASEM process context, how could interregional processes such as the ASEM education process perhaps also support this? Thank you.
Can I?
Yes, please go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No, I need your permission. No, but Therese, thank you very much. I think you are putting your finger on a very critical aspect, and as you mentioned, I tried to refer to that. But obviously, I think that the crisis showed that we have a convention, just to start with what the international community has agreed on. We have a convention on the right to education that was adopted in 1960. It's almost 60 years ago. The right to education today has to evolve. And there are at least 3 elements that are important to consider. One is to consider the right to lifelong learning, and not only to education, because until now it was understood as access to basic education primarily. And the right to lifelong learning is different. And we can see across the ASEM countries very interesting initiatives related to the right to lifelong learning. For example, the learning account in France, for example, the skills initiative in Singapore. Japan has just adopted a lifelong learning policy. Korea, China, and other countries who are advancing the right to lifelong learning, including for senior persons and persons who are out of the labor market. So that right to lifelong learning has to emerge as an international engagement. And for now, we are far from that. The second is the right to connectivity and to access to internet is not part of the right to education, but it has to be, and it has to be included in the normative instrument and in the perspective that we can see. And we know from our data and the ITU data that around 500 million learners do not have access to internet or to devices at home, and that means that what is considered as remote learning that is very smooth and successful is not reality internationally, but obviously within the country. So the right to connectivity has to be important. And the third maybe piece is what we mentioned earlier regarding the learner's record and the protection of the learner's record and data. This is a very important aspect. We are working on ethics in artificial intelligence, because we know that this is a challenging aspect, and there is a recommendation on artificial ethics and artificial intelligence that will be adopted by UNESCO General Conference, and that will have implications, of course, on education and training. But probably the ASEM could play an important role in shaping what are the promising practices that you can see across the countries, how you can adopt guiding principles that can be then maybe scaled at international level. You can be at the forefront of this, and I hope that you are, because of the dynamic that ASEM has, and because of the richness of the experience across Europe and Asia and Pacific. So there is an opportunity to advance that agenda, and I hope in your discussion you can advance that agenda. But for us as UNESCO, we would like to shape, and we are having an international conversation on the right to education in today's situation, and we see that this has to evolve. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just, I see that there are two more questions, one from Brikina from the Lifelong Learning Platform, and I think there was one more hand from Frederick de Decker. I'm looking to Emily for the time. Do we have time for two more questions, or?
Yes, I think we can make time for those two.
Yeah, okay.
But we would ask Mr. Chagrin to be brief, if possible, so that we don't run too late on schedule.
Okay, I think Frederick was first who raised his hand. I'm not sure, but please go ahead, Frederick, with your question.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and also thank you, Mr. Chakroun, for the inspiring presentation. And I think you rightly stressed there the link between the current changes and the importance of quality assurance in that whole change that we're going through. And that leads to a question from me, whether from a higher education institutions perspective, we can continue to use our current QA approaches and mainly rely on enhanced transparency and increased comparability, or whether we have to fundamentally adapt our QA approaches. Because I was in a discussion with students yesterday, and they said we've just changed from program to institutional accreditation. Are we going to make this next step, or if you want to call it like that, already now, or can we pause for a while and see how our current systems can be adapted to these changes? Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And Frederick is putting a very important question that we can't be brief in responding, but maybe I think depending on the scenarios that we are considering and the direction that the landscape will take, probably the quality assurance modalities and approaches will have to evolve. If we remain within, let me call it, the conservative scenario, probably the way we have been accrediting tertiary education institution programs will continue. But from my perspective, the new normal cannot be the conservative scenario. Probably there will be something in between. And in that, one is how we are quality assuring all these programs that are online and organized in different learning settings. But one aspect that I mentioned, and I think we shouldn't neglect it, is that we have new stakeholders that are coming to the landscape, particularly from the private sector, commercial and non-profit as well, that are disrupting the market and disrupting the ecosystem. And the question for us as an international community is either we close our eyes and we say they are outside, and I don't think that's a good scenario, but and rather to engage with them and to see how we can collaborate, how we can leverage, what are the ethical aspects that we need to put, what are the regulatory aspects that we need to consider. And probably this will have impact on governance. And we didn't discuss that, but I think this is a critical aspect that we will need to consider in our debate today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have a last question from Brikena from the Lifelong Learning platform. But Brikena, I would like to ask you if you could just give your explain your question very short, or just ask one question, because I think it might be too much for the time that is left. Could you just clarify shortly your question, Brikena?
Thank you, Nadia, and good morning to everyone, and thank you, Borhen, also for your presentation. I was intrigued by the issue of learning outcomes that you mentioned, and as we are going to work this year specifically on this and how it links to assessments and also to learners' well-being in general, I wanted to maybe just have a little bit more explanation from your side why you think are the reasons that the learning outcomes are not used enough, and then what would be your recommendation in that regard? Thank you.
I will be very brief, and thank you, Brikena. I'm very pleased to meet with you in this context. We think that we are lacking a common language on learning outcomes internationally. And we think that's an effort that we will need to take, be it through the ASEM, for example. We are working in the field of vocational training with CEDEFOP on global handbook on learning outcomes. There is an effort also in the context of the Lisbon Convention work with my colleagues working on higher education as well. So I think that we are still lacking a common language on learning outcomes, and that will need an effort from all of us. And I hope that the ASEM will, and I know that there are many interesting initiatives there that can drive this agenda. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for being so cooperative with the family picture. Now we have a nice one for our archives. And thank you, Borhen, for this very interesting, compelling presentation. I think you have certainly given us food for thoughts. And thank you for being so proactive and asking very interesting questions as well. So now we're going to move on to the second part of this workshop, the panel discussion. And hopefully our distinguished speakers will help shed some more light on some aspect of what Borhen referred to as credential jungle, which are very much liked, and possibly elaborate on some of the 5 conditions he listed for credential adaptability. At this stage, I'm going to hand over to Therese Zhang, Deputy Director for Higher Education Policy at the European University Association, who will introduce this panel of seasoned experts and kindly agreed to moderate this panel discussion. Therese, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello again, everybody. Thank you, Emily. And without further ado, I think we will go into this panel discussion and the first round of presentations to start with. May I perhaps ask my panelists to switch on their cameras if this has not been done yet, so that we can see the 4 of you. So I will briefly introduce our 4 panelists, whom you might actually already know, and then they will give a short input, and we will hopefully still get some time for discussion. And in the meanwhile, of course, please don't hesitate to put any question you might have on the chat box. So our 4 panelists today are, for the first person, it's Darren McDermott, who's the team leader designate for the EU Share project. Many of you might already be familiar with this. And Darren is going to present on the Share program, of course, but also on synergies and collaboration opportunities between Share and the ASEM education process. Our second panelist today is Herman Deleu, who's the executive director of the Groningen Declaration Network, which he also initiated back in 2012, and he will talk a bit about the state of play also and future plans in the ASEM Education Group on digitalization, but also tell us a bit more on the Groningen Declaration Network and relevant initiatives in terms of digital credentializing. Our third panelist here is Kraut Beyun, who's the Chief Executive of the UK NERIC and has extensive experience indeed in major initiatives in international qualification and standards. And she will tell us a bit more about the cross-border quality assurance network in higher education in Asia and Europe, and also about what the ASEM Working Group is doing on the Bridging Declaration. And last but certainly not least, our fourth panelist is Magali Sunen, who's a senior policy advisor at the Belgian-Flemish Ministry of Education and Training, and she will present on how the ASEM expert group on interregional credit transfer mechanisms and learning outcome systems work, and the state of art, and also some perspectives for the future. So, Darren, I think we are all ready as you are, if you want to start your presentation. Thank you.
Many thanks, Therese, and good afternoon, everyone from Singapore. Good morning to those of you in Europe. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you on Share today in this first in a series of the ASEM Education Plan workshops. I'd sincerely like to thank Nadia and Emily for the invitation, and I'm also very grateful to Dr. Chakrun for his excellent keynote speech, which set the agenda on shared concerns and routes to a more inclusive future through lifelong learning, multilateralism, and digital transformation. So I'd firstly like to give an overview of some key education structures, policies and initiatives being pursued by the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Secondly, I'd like to look at some of the insights into the EU's flagship higher education program with ASEAN, which has been running since 2015. I've been involved since 2015 and became team leader of the program this time last year. I'm also happy to say that the SHARE program has been extended for 2 more years until the end of 2022. And then finally, I'd like to reflect on the opportunities for a closer Asia-Europe collaboration through the SHARE extension. So as many of you are aware, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is an intergovernmental organization in Southeast Asia consisting of 10 countries. Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, and Thailand formalized their political, economic, and social cooperation with the ASEAN Declaration in Bangkok on August 8th, 1967. And following the subsequent accession of Brunei, Vietnam, Laos PDR, Myanmar, culminating with Cambodia in 1999, the bloc embarked on concerted regional integration and connectivity initiatives. So ASEAN is chaired by the annual rotating presidency, and that's recently transferred to Brunei from Vietnam. And Brunei will hold the presidency for the duration of 2021. It's administered by the ASEAN Secretariat based in Jakarta, Indonesia. The ASEAN Charter, adopted by all ASEAN member states in 2007, provided the legal status and institutional framework for the bloc. This was further formalized by the Declaration of the ASEAN Community, signed by ASEAN leaders at their 27th summit in Kuala Lumpur on the 22nd of November 2015. And by 2050, it's expected that ASEAN will be the 4th largest economy in the world, after the European Union, the US, and China. And going some way towards realizing this, on the 15th of November last, we saw the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, led by ASEAN, and it's a free trade agreement in Asia Pacific between the 10 ASEAN member states and 5 of their FTA partners, Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. And this constitutes the largest free trade zone in the world, comprising 30% of global gross domestic product in the largest population coverage. On December 1st, the EU and ASEAN elevated their now 44-year-old dialogue to that of a strategic partnership. And this has further cemented the relationship between these 2 regional organizations based on shared values and principles. So moving on, the ASEAN education sector is governed by the biannual ASEAN Ministers of Education meeting and the annual ASEAN Senior Officials meeting, or SOMED. Chairmanship rotates alphabetically between ASEAN member states and is currently held by the Philippines until the end of 2021. And the ASEAN Secretariat supports coordination and implementation of education sector activities under the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Pillar. And this is led by the Education, Youth and Sports Division. The second ASEAN Work Plan on Education 2016 to 2020 and the current work plan and the programmatic Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Higher Education have framed work towards the vision of an ASEAN higher education space. Higher education is therefore a key modality of ASEAN's regional development, connectivity, integration and identity. But we're coming up on the end of the second work plan, and the development of the forthcoming ASEAN Work Plan on Education 2021 to 2025 is currently being undertaken. This is being carried out through a two-step approach: consultation with stakeholders, workshops, and then the reporting of the results of those meetings and workshops to SOMED and ASEAN member states. This is expected to be completed by the end of March. And the emerging areas of focus for higher education, and I say this having attended some of the work plan discussions, are the strengthened role of institutions in lifelong learning through flexible, innovative, cross-border education and research collaboration. And secondly, sustained and strengthened ASEAN capacity in higher education harmonization through strategies, mechanisms, and scholarship. So the latter includes reference to many of SHARE's activities over the last 5 years, and it's cognizant then of recommendations made by the programme on the strengthening and sustainability of qualification frameworks, quality assurance, credit transfer mechanisms, and the establishment and regional ownership of an ASEAN branded scholarship. And this was explored in the recently published study on enhancing intra-ASEAN university student mobility. The colleagues at the Asia-Europe Foundation Education Department contributed significantly to the research for this study. So SHARE is the EU's flagship higher education cooperation programme with ASEAN. It's currently delivered by a consortium comprised of the British Council, the DAAD, NOFIC, and ENQA. The British Council, as programme lead, is responsible for the SHARE Programme Management Office and Result Area 1, Policy Dialogue. The DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Organisation, and ENQA, the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, are leading on Result Areas 2A, Qualifications Frameworks, and 2B, Quality Assurance. And NOFIC, the Netherlands International Education Agency, is leading on Result Area 3, the ASEAN EU Credit Transfer System, and the credit-bearing SHARE Intra-ASEAN Student Mobility Scholarship. So in the first phase of SHARE, the consortium had the benefit of membership by Campus France and also the European Universities Association. We hope to be able to continue to engage their expertise, albeit more informally, in the 2-year extension. SHARE's overarching objective then is to strengthen regional cooperation and enhance the quality, competitiveness and internationalization of ASEAN higher education, thus contributing to an ASEAN higher education space. The approach has been inclusive and continues to be inclusive, and the programme engages with ASEAN and relevant non-ASEAN entities to build on existing initiatives and serve as a platform for SOMED and the ASEAN Secretariat to engage with the wider higher education community. Since 2015, SHARE has held 11 policy dialogues to discuss technical and operational matters of concern to the programme's key stakeholders of regional organisations, institutions and students. The most recent policy dialogue was held virtually over the course of 3 weeks in June 2020, and this can be viewed on SHARE's YouTube channel. The ASEAN Qualifications Reference Framework, or the AQRF, and the ASEAN Quality Assurance Framework, as we call it, ACAF, has been further developed by SHARE, and institutional capacity has been strengthened to develop national qualifications frameworks in ASEAN member states using the AQRF. SHARE has supported the development, alignment, and dissemination of the ASEAN Quality Assurance Framework, and contributed to the recognition of the ASEAN Quality Assurance Network as an ASEAN entity. SHARE has also developed a platform facilitating credit transfer in the ASEAN region, specifically for SHARE scholarship awardees. And the SHARE ASEAN Europe Credit Transfer System is designed to be compatible with Europe's ECTS and the ASEAN University Network, or AUN CTS. And this then supports the SHARE scholarship. This pilot has built on existing initiatives by the AUN and CMO RIHEAD, and dispersed more than 550 scholarships to ASEAN students to study at an ASEAN or European university, as it were. But in recent years, the focus of the scholarship has shifted significantly to intra-ASEAN provision. And the reason for this is we needed to test the regional architecture and support and provide learning for further development of a sustainable ASEAN branded scholarship. Some of the main challenges, as with many other regions, are aligning the diversity in approaches to higher education and overcoming disparities in investment and institutional capacity to resource intra-regional student mobility. These challenges are similar to those faced by European governments and institutions prior to the Bologna process, and it's just one of the reasons why it makes complete sense to consolidate the Europe and ASEAN relationship and leverage shared learning. In the second phase of SHARE and the 2-year extension, the formalization of communities of practice across ASEAN, covering key dimensions and commitments from the Kuala Lumpur Declaration, will ensure greater collaboration, cohesion, and momentum towards the goal of an ASEAN higher education space. As I said, this will be a core modality over the course of the 2-year extension and will provide a structure for targeted capacity building initiatives. Augmenting trust in the quality of ASEAN higher education provision is a key aspect of SHARE. In this regard, the qualifications and quality assurance frameworks serve as essential tools in facilitating recognition of degrees and supporting higher education systems amidst the challenges now and to come. The expansion of digital credentials and facilitation of their international recognition through digital transformation of the AECTS is another innovation that will be explored during the 2-year extension of SHARE. As the world contends with the fallout from COVID-19, the SHARE program is in a strong position to leverage its expertise, experience and network to provide evidence-based capacity building, specifically to ASEAN higher education institutions. And while physical mobility remains central and a core modality of the SHARE program, leveraging online and blended learning methodologies are rich areas of to be explored, rich areas of scope to be explored in the extension. We need to bring the internationalization agenda to a wider population of students through internationalization at home, internationalization of the curriculum, and virtual mobility, collaborative online international learning. And these are real opportunities to be grasped. They were before the pandemic, but even more so now. And the SHARE extension will focus on strengthening ASEAN ownership of project results, their sustainability, and will work with key stakeholders to identify ASEAN entities that can take over the work of managing the scholarship, the CTS platform, and other regional architecture supporting an ASEAN higher education space. The collaborative spirit that is so evident between ASEAN and European education is the lifeblood of trust and transparency between our higher education systems, and indeed SHARE's work. We couldn't achieve our objectives without the willingness of practitioners from both regions to convene and, yes, share, pun intended, their knowledge and experience. In line with our open approach to capacity building, we have and will continue to work with experts from the ASEM regions beyond the EU and ASEAN, including Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, to name but a few. And to that end, we're assembling a new expert working group for our result areas for the 2-year extension. Furthermore, we keep a close eye on the policy developments across both regions, not only to avoid duplication, but also to ensure maximization of opportunities. We're pleased to contribute to the 8th ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education through the expert group on inclusive mobility of people and knowledge, and to prepare for the ARC 8 Outlook Report 2030. see great potential in the ASEM education stock-taking reports and wish to collaborate on sharing data from the SHARE program and encouraging our partners in ASEAN to do so also. SHARE is also keen to develop closer links with the Bologna Global Forum. We'd like to increase the visibility of ASEAN higher education institutions with European counterparts, with a view to creating further sustainable partnerships between the regions. In short, the SHARE program is always looking for fresh perspectives and expertise to contribute to our work. We are therefore pleased to hear from any ASEM members and participants on opportunities to collaborate within the scope of our result areas. I'd like to thank you today for your kind attention. Please feel free to contact me should you have any further questions or wish to contribute to SHARE's work over the coming 2 years. And I'll now pass back to Therese. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. I have to say I'm very impressed, but because you stopped at the very minute I was about to say it's the last minute for your presentation. Thank you very much for being so timely. I see that in the chat box that there is no immediate question for clarification, and I don't see any hand on my screen at least. So I will pass the floor directly to Herman for his presentation, and I can also take the clarification questions and any other kind of questions actually afterwards. Herman, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Just a minute. I had been working on my slides, and yeah, they should be here.
Right.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Still, can you see them now? No, I don't think so.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Well, while you are
right.
searching, I can perhaps just pop up the question that came in the chat box for Darren.
Okay.
If Darren is still there.
Okay.
Yeah, quickly, and then in the meanwhile you can figure out how to share a screen. So Darren, we have a question here from Michael Graham. Hello, asking if you can say how many countries are using the RQF, and also what take-up is there for digital credentials by people in the region. If you could very briefly answer to that, and perhaps also continue afterwards if you wish.
Okay, so very good. I would say all ASEAN countries are developing their national qualifications frameworks in line with the ASEAN qualifications reference framework. Digital credentials is much less widespread, and I would say that it's confined to some of some countries. Singapore would be a very good example of a country that has rolled out the use of digital credentials across its education institutions. There's an organization called Accredify, which has managed to sign up pretty much all of the education institutions in Singapore to its system. But there is, I think, an appreciation and a desire within other ASEAN member states to look at this as an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Darren. I think in the meanwhile, Herman has managed to sort out the presentation. Can we start? Or
I think if it runs this way, I can't see my own video, but is the slide visible to all?
It was, but now it disappeared again, at least for me.
I'm confused.
How much shall I share it for you to make things easier?
Herman? Herman, are you still there? Hope so. All right. I think we are running into a technical issue, and hopefully Herman will be able to join back, because I see that notification that he has briefly left the meeting. Herman, are you there? Yes. Should I just perhaps further proceed? And oh, he's back. Just a second. I hope it works. Herman, are you back? No. Perhaps I can take the next speaker, and then we are coming back to Herman Deleu, right? Our next speaker is Claude. Are you ready to share your, Emily is sharing your screen, Claude.
Yes, Emily,
Yes.
if you could load up the PowerPoint, that'd be really helpful.
Yes, Claude, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Trace. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, wherever you are. I hope this finds you all safe and well. I'm Cloud. I'm from the UK NARIC INIC office. Well, I've been fortunate enough to be involved from the very beginning in the working group on recognition and the ASEM education process. So I've been asked to update you on the work of the working group on recognition. To do that, next slide, please, Emily. I've put together a very succinct 3 slides to talk you through the journey of the last decade, last 10 years, and then hopefully bring you right up to date to where we are, and with some further thoughts on future next steps for discussion. Next, please, Emily. As you can see from here, the history of ASEM Working Group on Recognition dates back to 2011. It was a follow-up action on the chair's conclusions of the 3rd ASEM-ME. This group was constituted at the beginning with the view to drafting a convention on the recognition of qualifications in higher education in the Asian and European regions. The first meeting took place in December 2011 in Vienna, where we looked at the scope and the design of the intended or the proposed convention and the drafting of the desired document. On reflection, it was a very complicated process for the group to reach consensus on the purpose and the tone of the proposed convention for a number of reasons. One, existing conventions. As many of you are aware, there exist already 6 regional conventions governing the recognition of high qualifications in higher education. Secondly, if we look at regionally, progresses regionally, the European community has had a relatively more extensive experience in qualifications recognition and developing supporting measures, including legal frameworks at community level, and also the well-established NARIC networks as a result of relatively well-implemented Lisbon Recognition Convention. Also, common frameworks in the form of NQF, National Qualification Frameworks, European Higher Education Areas, ECTS, Diploma Supplement, and quality assurance systems with identifiable common standards. So you can see progress or advances in the European region. In Asia, APEC and ASEAN have also played a key role in developing regional economic and educational cooperations with demonstrable but varied progresses at national level. Now, against that backdrop, the Asian community were faced with challenges in developing and implementing systematic and mutually acceptable practices. Having considered various issues and realities, the working group reached the conclusion that in place of a new convention, the effective step forward would be a clear statement focusing on accelerated effort in forging closer links across the regions. And that thought process or the evolution of the thinking resulted in the transformation of the proposed convention to the Declaration of Intentions. And in 2012, the Bridging Declaration on Recognition was born and presented to the 4th ASEM. With the creation of the Bridging Declaration, the focus of the working group also evolved, shifting from a legalistic approach to developing concrete, tangible steps to implement the ASEM Recognition Bridging Declaration. And the renewed mission of the working group in 2013 was to strengthen and facilitate dialogue, coordination, collaboration, and promotion of qualification and recognition amongst ASEM member countries. The working group was also tasked to develop strategic cooperation in qualification recognition, credit transfer, comparative research on national qualification frameworks, and harmonization of academic standards. Now, I note this concept was echoed in Darren's presentation a few moments ago. Now, to achieve this ambition, 3 specific action plans, as you can see from this slide, were approved and adopted. Action Plan 1 is to build a coordination platform to support the Asian National Information Centers, the annex, as we described at the time. And this was created and launched in 2015, I believe, the aim of which was to encourage and accelerate the formation and the establishment of the individual national recognition centers in Asia. Action point 2 was to develop guidelines, principles, and good practices on recognition that's relevant to the ASEM region, both Asia and European regions, and the ASEM initiative. And Action Plan 3 was to establish cross-border quality assurance network, bringing together recognition and quality assurance. Next one, please, Emily. Fast forward to more recent years, as you can see, following the establishment of the ANIC coordination platform and also the publishing of the recognition guidelines, CBQuan was created and had its formal first meeting in December 2016. That makes the formal establishment of CBQuan a very unique cross-regional organization in cross-border higher education quality assurance. Moving forward, in 2018, CBQuan had its second General Assembly, at which stage we agreed on further new initiatives, including first one, the new action plan for building Asia-Europe excellent quality assurance program platform, showcasing good experience and good provisions. Secondly, to develop a framework of guidelines for quality provision in cross-border education across the Asian and European countries. These were ambitious, impressive goals we set for ourselves. Now, quietly moving to the bottom line, which was the planned third CBQuan annual meeting, which was scheduled to take place in China in 2020. And unfortunately, COVID arrived and disrupted the workflow and the work progress. So we're yet to come back to revisit the progress from 2020. Moving on to next, Emily, please. What next? I note in the keynote speech there was also a interesting question mark. What next? What the future direction of travel? I've listed here a few thoughts being discussed continuously, also more recently, how we pick up the past experience and progress to date. I think there are a few things probably we could discuss and consider. One is to embed quality assurance and recognition measures that we developed over the years firmly into our practices across the two regions. Secondly, there were a number of cooperation and communication platforms being proposed, and I think it will be useful to make the proposed platforms a reality to connect the ASEM communities. And I think from our shared most recent experience of 2020, we all recognize the power of information connectivity using technology is a pressing issue for us, as well as the people we serve, i.e. the individuals, the learners. And the third thing is to renew our commitment to skills area, looking at transferable skills, particularly of this generation that suffered hugely in the pandemic. My final thoughts was for us to consider the priorities and evolving challenges we all face, but take into consideration characteristics of Asia and Europe, so that we can come up or develop relevant to marketplace strategic plans. So that's very quickly, very briefly, an update of the past 10 years and where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claude. Thank you for your presentation. I see right now no hand and also no question in the chat box, no immediate question for you. So hopefully we will have some time to discuss all this together. So now I would like to try to go back to Herman. Are you still there, Herman?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
And I'm sorry for why my presentation went wrong.
Oh, don't worry. I'm sure all of us can relate to this because it happened only once to each of us in the past months. So Emily now is sharing on your behalf, and the floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome. While I was listening, somehow, I guess this can be a feeling that all of us have, regardless of how great technology is, still it doesn't convey the same sense that a live performance does. I can't really see you, although, well, anyway, I'm not going to pause on that, but I just wanted to share. It's a bit unfamiliar not to be in touch. Emily, could you please take the next slide? I'm supposed to give an update on the recently established ASEM expert group on digitalization, which was commissioned, if I may say so, at ASEM meeting 7 in Bucharest, May 2019.
Sorry, Herman, I'm briefly interrupting you because I don't know for the others, but I have difficulties understanding what you say. Could you please just put your microphone a slightly little bit further to your mouth, perhaps? Because I can hear a very, very heavy.
Is this any better? Can you hear me now, or is
yes,
it still?
It's much better. It's much better. I had a lot of interference. Yeah.
I have to buy a new headset. The ASEM education ministers in 2019 invited senior officials to establish an expert group on the transversal topic of digitalization, which is very much what we have been hearing this morning already. And we are there to foster a dialogue and synergies on activities in the field of digital learning and teaching. In my presentation, by the way, I'm not going to touch upon teaching. It's basically learning and learning artifacts. The composition of the expert group includes academic experts, digitalization experts from NGOs, and representatives from student bodies. We had our first meeting 12 December 2019 in Berlin. It was really a very lively meeting in an unforgettable hotel. I must say, bringing together 11 national experts from Austria, Belgium, Flanders, China, the European Commission, France, India, Latvia, the Netherlands, Romania, the Russian Federation, and Thailand, and 7 NGO experts from CDFOP, DAAD, European Erasmus Student Network, the European Training Foundation, the European University Association, the Groningen Declaration Network, which was me and Seami already had. Next slide, please, Emily. And we are, the aims as formulated at the outset are that we provide a pool of digitalization experts, specifically working within the ASEM education context, formulate policy recommendations for the ASEM Strategy 2030 and the next ASEM Ministers meeting, focusing on digitalization, drawing up recommendations for conceptualizing new ASEM initiatives focusing on digital learning and teaching, foster the dialogue on the potential of digitalization in higher education, specifically with regard to the 4 priority areas of the ASEM education process in general, which are quality assurance and recognition. Well, we have heard already quite a lot on that. Engaging business and industry in education, which is what Borhene already pointed out. Balanced mobility, I'm not going to touch upon that, and lifelong learning, including TVET, TVET. And we are supposed to strengthen the collaboration and connectivity by identifying and promoting good practices of international education cooperation between Asia and Europe, which we will. But we are not there yet. Next slide, please, Emily. What we are doing at this moment, well, as will not be a surprise to all, the COVID-19 pandemic also disrupted the work of the expert group. The production of the position paper will be resumed shortly, and it will function as an annex to the ASEM education strategy to be presented at ASEM ME8. And in it, we hope to present the challenges and opportunities digital transformation entails for Asia-Europe cooperation and provide recommendations for policymakers on how to address these issues. We identified 4 priority areas for Asia-Europe education cooperation in the digital era, which is 1, digital infrastructure, 2, international exchange and mobility, 3, lifelong learning, including TVET, and 4, quality assurance and recognition. These will also be the chapters of the report. To my mind, speaking partly with the head of the Groningen Declaration, but mostly with the head of the ASEM process, we think that ASEM and the AEP in general could contribute to create more trust and transparency with regard to digital credentialing if we would simply take advantage of what is already there and what is up and coming. You should realize that we have a multitude of initiatives and ongoing systems available in both Asia Pacific and in Europe. I highlighted them respectively in black and in blue. In Australia and New Zealand, we have My Equals, Canada, China, basically, you would say this could provide the momentum that is needed to see, well, we have these major blocks already operational, and they are willing to cooperate in many ways along many platforms. So why shouldn't we simply take these as the first stepping stone and see where we can go from there? Next slide, please, Emily. And I think for the ASEM educational process to benefit to the max from the potential and the infrastructure that's already available, we should link it with the organizational and political infrastructure that is equally there. Borhene already touched lightly on the UNESCO Global Convention, which is really important, and by the way, even already included in the annex a few remarks on the desirability of including digital learning artifacts in the global convention practice. Then I should point out the Tokyo Regional Convention that our Asian attendees will most likely be aware of, which brings together the Asian stakeholders. And I should say, since it is going to take place in Japan, we may count on the fact that the newly established Japanese the ethnic, that's the correct term if I'm not mistaken. Sorry for the for using enigmatic as if it would be a generic term in promoting the transition to digital credentialing. Of course, there's the Lisbon Recognition Convention, a very important tool worldwide. It, even though it basically concerns the Europe, North America, Russian Federation, Australia, New Zealand, a few more, still it's not the one convention, of course, but the Lisbon Recognition Convention has worked very diligently on these topics over the years. Recognition. I just wanted to point out the European Area of Recognition manual that you can find on the link that I just provided. Subsequently, there is work going on in the Enigmatic network on the DigiRec initiative that I'm going to mention in the next slide. And then, of course, we have the very important Rome Declaration, by which the European Higher Education ministerial meeting was concluded in September 2020. And it's important to read out specifically the mention that was made there. Digital solutions will facilitate secure, efficient, and transparent exchange of data. Joint digital approaches to enhance recognition, quality assurance, and mobility are needed. We ask the Bologna follow-up group to map existing and find new solutions to enhance the interoperability of digital systems and the exchange of student and institutional data in full respect of privacy and security, taking into account the experiences of the European State Student Card Initiative and other initiatives. We are going to hear more from them, I'm sure. Emily, could you turn the next slide, please? DigiRec, I mentioned it already before. This is an initiative started by NAFIC and a number of enigmatic partners, which explores the relationship between digital student data and the recognition of foreign qualifications. Basically what they do, they say, we as enigmatic offices are facing the issue of incoming student data. We might want to process them in the office and then produce artifacts that students can use once the recognition decision has been taken. And the DigiRec and now its sequel DigiNet project survey what is going on and will come up with recommendations. I happen to be on the steering committee just as two more colleagues from the European area are involved here. You will hear more about that as well. And then I should mention, and this is by no means what you call an exhaustive overview. I just highlight the initiatives that I'm aware of, but there are many more. HIDI, the Higher Education Interoperable Data Initiative, which is taken on by ICWAR, and with involvement of the European University Association and more. I really recommend you take a look at the link that I provide. I think if the ASEAN education project process would want to cooperate and collaborate on these issues, we would do well to consider these ongoing initiatives, and I'm more than welcome to now provide a brief overview of the Groningen Declaration Network, which is not an institutional initiative. It's basically a grassroots movement which was created in 2012 in the Netherlands, reached foundation status in December 2016. We have 100 plus signatories, a truly global board of directors. The current chair is Kathleen Massey, Canada. I'm the founder and the executive director of the Groningen Declaration. We basically provide an annual meeting each spring. In the past, it will move to probably November for this year because of COVID. We would have had our annual meeting in India last year, had to cancel this year in Canada, next year in the Netherlands. And we try to support global mobility initiatives worldwide, basically by looking into the issue of digital credentialing and lifelong learning. And we have been working closely with UNESCO, with the World Bank and ENIC-NARIX, other partners. I just mentioned the ones that are most likely to be familiar to you. Next slide, please, Emily. I said we are a grassroots movement in the sense that there is no European Commission or World Bank or UNESCO or whatever international organization directive for us to operate. We maintain a diverse, global and interconnected ecosystem of participants coming from universities, national ministries, immigration authorities, service providers, because we believe that only the mix of all those participants and stakeholders can bring about the understanding that this is something that concerns us all, and we expect our participants to commit to learner privacy, data protection, transparent and responsible practices, recognition of digital student data and qualifications. Next slide, please, Emily. In our annual meeting, we bring together authorities and the international community to identify and collaboratively develop new initiatives focused on best practice sharing among the attendees. And we have well, I can live with that. That's okay. Maybe you go forward, Emily, because you move to the next slide. Yeah, this is actually part of the Groningen Declaration itself, which was formulated way back in 2011. And here you find, if I may say, almost the same ingredients that Borhena Chakroun also highlighted in his keynote, impressive keynote. We do believe that digital student data are the way to go for lifelong learning. We always insist on interoperability because we don't believe that there will be a time when the world would see one standard for the exchange of data. That's impossible. So rather than prescribing a standard, we say it should always be interoperable. I noticed that my time is coming up, just 1 minute. So please, next slide. This is the way we think the cross-border mobility of learners will be made possible by bringing in the providers as active players in the ecosystem. We want to make sure that students have access to their own awards. We focus on the issue of quality assurance, very important, has been mentioned several times. We bring in the ENIC-NARIC network and the evaluators, and we want to for recipients to be able to verify the content and the origin of the data that come to them, and the global learner should always be at the center of anything that happens. Next slide, please, Emily. This is just for those that would want to reach out to me. I think I have presented all the content, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much, Herman. Thank you. I don't see any immediate question, at least in the chat box, and also don't see any hands. So as we are running a bit late, I think I will just directly go to Magali. Magali, are you there?
Yes, I will share my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The floor is yours.
Here we go. Yes, so thank you very much for giving me the floor here in this meeting to present something from the side of the ASEM expert group on interregional credit transfer mechanisms and learning outcome systems. I will not go into the overall work of the group as such, but I will mainly focus on one topic, one outcome of our group, which is the ASEM Compendium for Higher Education. Okay, so I will start my presentation with some general information about the compendium itself, why we created this, etc. Then I will take you through the compendium, which is already out there and running. And then we can still look at the further steps that have to be taken for the compendium and also for the further work of our expert group. So let me start with the introduction. Since 2016, the expert group on credit transfer mechanisms and learning outcome systems have met regularly. And what is our goal? Well, we want to facilitate dialogue and promote cooperation in the field of credit transfer mechanisms and learning outcome systems. Now, for the compendium itself, the compendium already existed before 2016 in another form, in a printed publication. But since I think it was first discussed in 2017, and we really started to work on it since 2018, a new cooperation between the expert group and the ASEM Secretariat has been set up, which has been which has resulted now in a new form of the compendium. Now, what is exactly the aim of a compendium for higher education? Well, it has to improve transparency on the diverse educational landscape of the ASEM education process. And we also wanted to establish a valid source of reference for higher education institutions, not only for the institutions, but in fact, for all of us working in higher education institutions or international organization, ENIC-NARIC networks, etc., dealing with the issue of transparency and credit transfer. So the second aim of the compendium is to provide a comprehensive overview of the academic systems in the different partner countries within ASEM, and to help staff and educators from academic institutions to compare the academic systems among our countries and to find helpful information that is needed for cooperations with higher education institutions from the ASEM member states. So here on the bottom, I also include the direct link to the ASEM Education Compendium. Now, where are we at this moment? Oh, sorry, that was too fast. So what we started to work on with the expert group was to update the template. So as I already mentioned, before our work started, there was already a compendium that was published every year or every second year by the ASEM Education Secretariat. But we saw that there were quite some difficulties with that compendium because it was not regularly updated by countries. And also the indicators that were the indicators, the different aspects that were taken up in the compendium were sometimes completely different, differently filled out, differently understood by the countries. So what we wanted to do is really have clear indicators and use the same template for all countries and ask them to fill out this template. It resulted into an integrated tool, an online tool. So we are not publishing the compendium anymore in a paper version, for example. It's really an online tool that will hopefully be very useful for everyone in higher education in our countries. For the moment, we already have 25 country pages available. We started in 2018 with 7, and we have 18 extra that were delivered in 2020. For the moment, still 6 countries need to send their final version, and we have two new contributions that were sent to the Secretariat and want to finalize. You also see there peer review. That means that every country that is sending their country input to the Secretariat, we as expert group, we look at the content of each country file. Why is that necessary? Well, related to what I said in the beginning, we want the compendium really to be very useful, and therefore sometimes information that is given by a certain country can be very clear for that country what it's all about. But for example, for a European country, it might not be so easy readable or comprehensible. So as expert group, we peer review all the incoming templates, all the incoming country inputs, I mean, to see if it's all understandable. And then if not, or if we see that some information is missing, for example, we give some remarks, or we give some suggestions with the experts in our group. And then the ASEM Education Secretariat is further in contact with these countries to adapt or to adjust a little bit their template. And then when it's final, then it's published into the online tool. We are still missing input from 18 countries at this moment. So for all the countries here in this meeting today, I want to also ask you, please have a look if your country is already in the online tool or not. If not, please take up this task within your country with your colleagues within the ministry to also give us the input for your country so we can complete the tool. For people to find the compendium, it's on the homepage of the ASEM Education Secretariat. So on the top right, you see the link to the compendium. And if we click further, we have 4 blocks there. We have the About section, we have a How to Use, we have the consultation of the compendium itself, and the glossary. So for the first time use, the ASEM Education Secretariat also made a video tutorial explaining how the compendium works. So please have a look at this video if you log in for the first time. Now, if you really want to consult the compendium itself, it looks like this. So you have a list with all the countries mentioned, all the ASEM member countries, or partner countries. And the ones that are still in gray are the countries that are not available yet. The ones that are colored you can click on those, and then you will see the country input of that country. So okay, I see there's something wrong. Yes, so each country page has the same structure and information. So that means that we have for each country these 3 same chapters. One chapter is on the higher education system itself, the second one on quality assurance in higher education, and the third one explaining the credit system in higher education. So for each chapter, we have a number of indicators, for example, the number of higher education institutions and students in different levels, the structure of the higher education system in the country, the frameworks, the explanation about the grading system, about admission requirements, tuition fees, etc. So this is chapter 1. So the second chapter is focusing on quality assurance, explaining the quality assurance system of that country, which body is assuring quality, etc. And the third chapter is on the credit system in higher education, describing the system in the country, but also about which credit transfer system the country is using. As we heard earlier this morning, we have different credit transfer systems around our countries in Europe, in different regions. So it's important that we know to which of these credit systems a country is linked. We also have numbers of credits per academic year, per higher education cycle, so to really understand how these things are organized in the country. And also important is the link between credits and learning outcomes, which is also explained in the compendium. Now, this is an example of how a country input looks like. So for each country, as I mentioned, it's the same information, the same structure. If you want to compare or have a look at two countries at the same time, it's also possible to just have two screens next to each other and to go through the different chapters, through the different sections to see the differences between countries. So here you can also, at the right side, filter by country once again. So if you want to open up other countries, that's also possible. You can immediately go to, for example, section 1.3, number of higher education institutions. So everything is clickable. And also within the text, we have highlighted some keywords that are also taken up in the glossary. While also looking at the previous compendium that was earlier made, we thought it would be really good for this compendium, for this new version, to also work with a glossary that really provides definitions of the common terms that are used throughout the compendium. So you can click here on all the letters, starting with A, academic year, and then you get a definition of what is understood under academic year. So for all the terms, or for a lot of terms used in the compendium, there is an explanation in the glossary. So how to process your input from your country. So as I mentioned, the ASEM Education Secretariat is really following up with you. They can provide you with the country template. As already mentioned as well, if you fill out the template and you send it back to the Secretariat, they are in touch with our expert group that will review the country inputs, and then you can adapt if necessary. And only the final country input will be put online by the Secretariat. So further steps for the compendium. As I mentioned, it is already online. but it's not really officially launched at this moment. Because first we want to have it on a limited scale to collect still the missing inputs from these 18 countries before we reach out to the wider audience and before we really make it public and have an information and promotion campaign to really launch it. So please have a look. If your country is already there, very well done. And if your country is not there yet, please reach out to the Secretariat to fill out the template. The update procedure, it will be yearly updated. But of course, if there are certain changes in your country, in legislation, in structures, etc., it will also be possible for intermediate review. The ASEM Education Secretariat will contact you by email for updates, and we will also announce it during the seniors officials meetings and during the ASEMs. So for what we are also doing at this moment, so we try to reach out through various networks to the silent countries, so those that do not have the input yet. So that's important work that we are trying to do now. So if you have contacts, also maybe not in your own country, but in neighboring countries or other countries that you know, please also ask them to fill out their country input. Next steps that we will still work on in the coming period is to try to get even more uniformity in input delivery. Also, new sections, new indicators can be added if necessary, because, for example, we heard this morning already about micro-credentials, about digital credentialing. So if new emerging topics would come up, we can still add those to the compendium, as it is a living online tool. What we also want to investigate is further collaboration with other international organizations like UNESCO, or the Groningen, or other international organizations that also have similar information gathered. Then a little bit more to finish my presentation on the further steps for the expert group. So our expert groups makes a working program for each academic year. So for 2021, we will further work on the revision of these country contributions and the further development of the online tool. We are also working on the development of a publication on grading systems. We will try to organize a joint meeting with the digitalization expert group to see how we can cooperate further in the future with this group. And not only for this group, it hasn't been in our work plan for this year, but after hearing also the presentation of Cloud, I think we also have to reach out with the ASEM working group that she presented to see how we can, how we can find more synergies also with their work. And the same goes for the cooperation with UNESCO. So we will try to reach out to several other groups and international organizations to see how we can cooperate further. And last but not least, from our group, we also are prepared to give further input to the ASEM education strategy and the education plan 2030. And I have seen that a lot of the colleagues of our group are also attending today. So I hope in the discussion time that is still ahead of us, that we will be able to share our thoughts. So that's it for my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magali. Thank you. And I also have in the chat box Herman, who was precisely, it's connected to what you just said, who was precisely wondering whether the ASEM compendium would benefit and how from relating to the NARIC country pages that are very frequently consulted, of course. All right, I think we actually don't have that much time left for questions. I don't see Emily or Nadia on my screen. So is it okay to still take five minutes for questions before the comfort break?
Yeah, I would suggest you take a few questions if there are any, and to adjust the duration of the following brainstorming sessions so that we don't run too late in case you have
so
other
just
meetings.
Yes, just 5 minutes then, right? And then we can have our little comfort break. So I would open the floor then. If any of you has questions, please don't hesitate to also raise your hand and or put your question in the chat box. I already have two interventions from Herman first and then from Magali. So Herman, please go ahead first.
Yeah, Magali, thank you for this overview. I wasn't aware, I have to admit. It's interesting. You mentioned that in the compendium, by default, there is a chapter on credit and its link with learning outcomes. This, of course, is something that has come up as a red thread during this morning. So is there anything that you could perhaps explain briefly on what in general is the picture of learning outcomes and their use also in the various member states?
Yes, Magali, go ahead. And you also have a hand, so please feel free to continue after that.
Yes, my hand was more to answer to the comment that Herman also posted in the chat. So I'll start with that. We have several persons from ENIC-NARIC centers in our expert group, so we are well aware of what is also there available on the ENIC-NARIC website. Furthermore, we also took up the information that is, for example, already available through ECAR and their database on quality assurance. So we have been in touch with several other international organizations or initiatives. But what we do still hear also from the people of the ENIC-NARIC centers in the group is that the compendium is more comprehensive and it puts together different aspects that are maybe more spread over websites that are already existing. So that there is still a very big added value to the compendium itself, where on the other hand, otherwise you have to look for quality assurance on ECAR or for recognition on ENIC-NARIC or other databases that are existing. So that's one thing I want to comment on. The link between learning outcomes and credits. Yes, that's one of the indicators. So we ask to all the partner countries that are filling out their template on how this is taken up in their country. So for all the countries that already contributed, you can have a look at this in the compendium. I don't know all of them by heart. It's too difficult to answer this now, but you can have a look at it for each country.
Thank you very much, Magali, for your answer. I don't see any other hand right now. I guess your hand, Herman, is an old hand, right? It was your previous question. I just have a very quick, more like a fact-checking question, perhaps for you, Herman, but perhaps also for some others on the panel, because we have not really gone through this whole, let's define together what we commonly understand by this and that. When you talk about digital credentialing, and that might be quite important for higher education institutions, but also students alike, do I understand correctly? You are talking about digitalizing credentials, right? Not only about credentializing digital learning. So the credentials that are to be digitally credentialized can also be either blended learning or just, let's say, traditional learning. So not happening in a digital way.
Yeah, credential is a generic term in our understanding. Exactly. It may cover higher education, but not exclusively. This is one of the challenges to make people understand when we deal with lifelong learning. Credential could be just a credit, but it could also be a whole degree program.
Exactly.
But it is very desirable to come up with a glossary of such terms because I realize that this can be quite confusing, and I'm not. Well, anyway, I mean, let's leave it at that.
No, but
would that answer your question to begin with?
yes, but I just wanted to have your confirmation here, and I think it might be quite interesting and also important to understand that when we are talking about digital credentialing and all these systems for interoperability, we are not talking about installing those systems only for units, let's say, of digital learning. We are talking also about all kinds of things going from degrees to all kinds of qualifications and credentials of any type, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we are
correct.
talking
Well,
about the infrastructure, let's say.
yeah, if the learning and employment record in the US would be a bit familiar, we basically eventually we should consider any skills and learning that a person collects during that person's active lifetime.
Yeah.
So it can be primary, secondary, tertiary education, and then goes on into the workforce, whatever you collect. The next step, of course, is to assess how to make sense of all these, what you call skills and attainments. Well, anyway, but that would be digital credentialing.
Thank you very much for this precision, which I think is quite important. So I have Brikenna from the Lifelong Learning platform who says that they are working on a lifelong learning glossary that contextualizes terminologies like digital credentials, for example, we're talking about. So she would share also with us more soon. And I will perhaps finish this round of interventions with Magali, who also has a hand. And I see no other hand for the moment. So Magali, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just also want to come back on your question that you just posed. Just to inform, because it has also been mentioned by Borhin this morning about micro-credentials, which is also a very hot topic in Europe and in Asia. What we are doing within the European higher education area, which is much broader, of course, than the EU, we are running a project there for the moment. It's called Microball, and we are especially looking at micro-credentials from the point of quality assurance, from the point of recognition, and from the side of qualification frameworks. And within this project, it has we are only halfway for the moment, but it has since the beginning also came up very much in the discussions that you have to look at the credential in two parts. One part is the micro credential as a learning experience, but on the other hand, you have the credential, really the certificate, like the envelope that you're getting in the end. So also for the quality assurance of it, the recognition of it, you always have to look at the two parts, whether it's digitally or online given or not. You always have to look to the envelope, to the certificate, and to the learning experience itself. And both can be or digital or physical. The credentials as certificate will be mostly digital maybe in the future, but it's important to have both sides looked at and from every topic. Let's say if you look at quality assurance or recognition, it doesn't matter, you always have to look at the two sides of the credential, so it encompasses two different things, let's say. Therese, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, this is the sentence of 2020 and perhaps to be continued in 21. You're muted. All right. Thank you very much for your example, Magali. I think it finally illustrates all the different subtleties, let's say, we can have in this matter. And the conversation is certainly to be continued. In the meanwhile, I will wrap up this panel discussion, not that we had nothing else to discuss, on contrary, but because it's time. And I will handle back the floor to Emily, because you also need to explain us what will happen next, right? Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you again.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Therese, Darren, Herman, Cloud, and Maggie for wonderful and most interesting panel discussion. I think, like Therese just mentioned, we would have loved to dedicate more time for discussion, but if there are any more questions, feel free to send them in writing to us and we will put you in touch with the speakers. I'm convinced that many of the points that our speakers have raised will be taken up by our participants in the upcoming brainstorming sessions. Would also like to briefly thank our ASEF colleagues for their help with the communication. They're currently tweeting about the event, and you can find them using ASEF Edu if you want to retweet and tweet on this event. So before sending you to a well-deserved coffee, tea, or health break, please allow me to briefly explain how we are going to proceed for the brainstorming sessions. So after the coffee break, we will meet back in breakout rooms. We've tried to create a good balance of European, Asian participants, different types of profile, to allow for enriching exchanges. This means that you will probably not be in the same group as your colleagues if several of you have registered. We have prepared a very short brainstorming activity, which is similar to what we could have done in a physical setting. Not going to reveal anything just yet because our three lovely moderators will do that after the coffee break. So to moderate these three breakout rooms, we have Alexandra Angres from Aschaffenburg University of Applied Science in Germany and very active ASEM education partner, Sebastian Gries, Senior Project Manager at the German Academic Exchange Service Regional Office in Jakarta, and Therese Zhang, who you already know and who is such a wonderful moderator. We thought we would ask her to moderate yet another session. So you will be given about 20 minutes instead of the 30 initially planned to exchange ideas and brainstorm. And then we will meet back in the plenary to share results. This part of the meeting will not be recorded because we really want you to exchange freely and not be afraid to make some suggestions for the future initiatives. On this note, I would like to send you to a well-deserved break. Enjoy your break. We will see you back in 15 minutes for the breakout rooms and brainstorming session. Thank you. ASEM Education Secretariat has decided not to record the brainstorming sessions to allow participants to speak freely. If you're interested in taking part in a similar exercise in the future, please make sure to register for our upcoming workshops. Welcome back in plenary session. I hope you all had interesting and fruitful exchanges. I've moved around a bit from group to group and I had the feeling that things were going well. So I'm very glad to have witnessed that. I can tell you that organizing virtual events has been a steep learning curve for us. So I'm very curious to see the results of your discussions. In fact, we decided at the last minute to give you some more time because things were going so well. So perhaps we could start with group one, which was moderated by Therese. How did it go? Could you maybe share your group's whiteboard, please, and give us a brief summary of your group's input?
Just a second, I'm trying to share screen and find back what I wanted to share. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Can you? Yes. Can you see my screen? All right. So just quickly, in my group, we have not really decided on any initiative that we should stop. So I guess that's already one point. And this came along with the remark that actually it's quite important to keep the ASEM education process with things kind of blossoming as part of an informal process and not being too prescriptive in this regard. We have discussed the importance of, let's say, getting interconnected in various ways. One comment in this regard is to take profit of possible I will never manage to say this word, interoperability between interfaces with existing repositories, for example, for the compendium. This is also something that we have already discussed in the last plenary session, right? We also discussed and we also started a discussion about the need for sustainability. So how to basically further enhance outcomes that may or may not come from projects, and to kind of keep them and keep them going in terms of outcomes, and also perhaps in terms of further enhancing those after the lifetime of a given project. So, for example, implementation of the Asian qualifications framework, further supporting mobility between regions, etc., and all that also beyond the shared project as such. And the idea was to think about how we could build up or scaffold on existing networks beyond the project lifetime here. What we also discussed is the need for a kind of platform or a kind of scheme for mutual learning, for peer learning, be it between officials in the ASEM education process or at more, let's say, grassroots level. So to exchange on existing practices, but also on new developmental trends, such as the most cited micro-credentials, but it can also be on things like how do you do, I don't know, credit transfer, etc., etc. So creating really this opportunity for exchange. And then we had an interesting discussion on stakeholders. So what does that exactly mean, basically, and who are those? And also, is there really already a built-up common understanding, let's say, of who stakeholders are and how to involve them in the ASEM education process, but also in the various initiatives and projects of the process that really go down to institutional and users level, let's say, and how to involve them. And one approach that could be interesting here is to rather identify the different goals and consider them against the potential contributions, also taking into account that you might have various ranges, let's say, of people interested with an interest into initiatives, not only stakeholder groups, such as, for example, the one I am from, but also, let's say, the broader community of users, a community that could be reached out. And the question would be there how to use the various inputs we could gather. Our last idea was to think about a team, an agile team. It sounds a bit like a superhero team when I say it like that, but basically the idea would be to be able to reflect on how to embrace what is uncertain and also unpredictable, also considering the recent experience with the COVID crisis, etc., etc. I think I will perhaps stop here. Yes, my last post-it is about the role of the process as a global convener, also for amplifying initiatives that already exist, such as, for example, the UNESCO Global Convention on Recognition. And this relates also to how to interconnect basically in interesting and also existing initiatives and to amplify their importance on the global scene, let's say. I will stop here, I think, and also stop sharing my screen here. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody in my group.
Thank you very much, Therese, and thank you, Group 1, for this very comprehensive feedback. I have to admit, I'm quite impressed by the amount of qualitative input you managed to collect in such a limited time frame. So I'm hoping that the other two groups did as well. So let's continue now with Group 2. Alexandra,
Yeah,
how did it go? Have you managed to collect any interesting proposal?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for the excellent structure and preparation. That was, of course, helping us a lot. And then Reka for operating as she called her virtual hand to the participants. And then, of course, the discussion. For us, the most important thing was just to start off with sharing what was maybe most resonating with us. So where we perceive maybe most commonalities, but also most challenges. this. And that, of course, was ranging from credential that was reiterated and emphasized to how the world is so dramatically changed, and that digitalization is with us, and that it's basically to varying degrees, but we all share the same concerns and the same preoccupations, and that this facilitation of ground level experience is just so much more important, even more important. And stemming from the notion that the paradigm change of the right to education, which our keynote speaker said, to the right of lifelong learning, which was very much resonating with us. This would have implications also for future initiative and for the ASEM education process to unfold its potential. Credentials are just one area, but also the sharing of experience of how this kind of policies can be put into practice. Now, regarding this, we can maybe just highlight a couple of things that should, or that at least the group felt very important to be kept. And you could see the ones here ranging from the expert group, of course, of digitalization to the learning outcome, and the most visible and the most recent product or outcome, the compendium as such. But also very important in these times, or more than ever, is even more in-depth also research on lifelong learning. And this is where the ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub, which was not introduced in the panel, but which I think is clear, and we spent some time on explaining that. And Nina from DART was making the point that this is even more important as a evidence-based basis, well, for making policy recommendations. Moving on to what can even be more improved, and I'm very happy that here the colleague from Malaysia was involving himself in what could be included in MOOCs, since Malaysia is part of a couple of networks in MOOCs. So the micro-credentials that also was very much emphasized by the European Training Foundation representative was further discussed and then put into practice with this very concrete proposal where it could be included. And then, yes, regarding new initiatives, now we haven't really, we talked about it, but of course time was not enough to then go to the next level, which is not anymore the brainstorming, but really explore it. Would it be a new initiative, or could it be integrated into ongoing initiatives? So just to share some thoughts, and I'm inviting, of course, colleagues that have been active in this group to complement on what I'm saying. This could be sort of an online training center, ranging really from very practical issues that would be shared and trained, like train the trainer aspects, to a more comprehensive learning and teaching experience. But also the exchange, our colleague from Malaysia was stressing on doing virtual accreditation. So this kind of digital-based quality assurance platform of exchange. Could it be a peer learning activity or another kind of dialogue between stakeholders that are involved in this, or have been involved, especially now digitally over the last few months? And then very nice, my colleague from, I think, Karlsruhe University of Applied Science that is involved in a digital project with Taiwan has coined the buddy system, and to give just even more weight to peer learning and exchange on very operational aspects of digitalization. So this is just from different perspectives, but I think it's driving home very much the point of what was shared that would be vital in the future, so that the perspectives on realizing the vision of 2030 can be done. Thank you. And once again, thank you very much to my groups, and thanks to Rekha for facilitating.
Thank you very much, Alexandra and Group 2 for this very valuable input. Perhaps I should tell you at this point that we will definitely use all your suggestions and ideas. In fact, I'm sure that they will prove instrumental for us in the drafting committee when we work on the very first draft of the action plan. And we will also give you the opportunity to contribute some more, so you will have some more time to go into the next level, as Alexandra put it, because we will send the first draft to all ASEM education partners by email, so there will be some possibilities to exchange also by written procedure this time. Okay, so finally, last but not least, group 3. Sebastian, how did it go? Should probably tell you that Sebastian has kindly agreed to step in on the last minute to help us, although I'm sure nobody noticed, unless you told them.
Well, I forewarned my group, but no, I did. Don't worry about it. Well, good evening from Indonesia here. I must say, I feel like we were probably the most critical of all these groups, so please don't shoot the messenger. Leonie, could I ask for you probably to share the whiteboard, if that's possible? Then I'll go into the details. I have to admit, I'm rather clumsy with Miro. I only used it once before. All right, it's coming. Okay, so here we are. I probably start with some more cross-cutting points that we identified in group number 3. First of all, we felt that in general, when it comes to the ASEM education process, communication about the initiatives probably need to be improved. We had the feeling that quite often results of the working groups, splendid results and work that is great, is not well communicated and often doesn't go quite beyond the immediate stakeholder network. Also, we felt that that's the second key point we've identified, that sometimes there's a certain disconnect between policymakers and what the ministers discuss and identify, and the follow-up in the working groups. So if this link could be, let's say, better established or be made more clear, it would probably also help implementation. For the third main point or key point, we think that while, of course, the working groups as they are and as they evolved over time, they all contributed highly valuable content, it might be necessary to now rethink some of them, probably merge them, or at least reorganize what we labeled as defunct working group. That's a rather strong word, though, but I hope you understand what we mean by this. As you can see, and I'm starting on the right-hand side here, we were indeed rather critical. We even identified an initiative that, in our group at least, we felt that there could be sense in stopping it. I'm explaining the reason, and that is the ASEM network of MOOCs. The reason is that for us, at least for the participants in my brainstorming group, we felt it's a rather obscure initiative. None of us could really pinpoint what is going on in the group, and we felt that there were some communication issues also. When members of our brainstorming group got in touch with them in the past, there were no responses, and overall we didn't really understand what is currently going on and where the added value is. So you can read a bit more in the comment itself. When we say improve, and I'm going to 2 rows further left, yes, of course we mean, keep the initiative, but there's always something to improve. So that's why I said we're probably a rather critical group, but please don't misunderstand it. When it comes to the ASEM recognition bridging declaration, it certainly has its value, but we felt that it's probably about time to do some stock taking on what we can do further and work on in the future. 2020 was quite a shift in terms of how we work, how we study, how we learn, and how we teach. And obviously this has implications when it comes to recognition and aspects of it. I think the word was there's probably some distance and fatigue within ASEM when it comes to these issues. Again, I'm just a messenger also, and we had a very open discussion. And that's why we thought it might be worthwhile revisiting some of the aspects and probably reorganizing some of the initiatives. And this also applies to the expert group on inter-regional credit transfer mechanisms and learning outcomes. That's why they're connected, these three yellow post-its. When it comes to the expert group on digitalization, it's quite obvious that this is a key initiative that need to be kept. But of course, there's always something to add or to optimize. And in this case, is what's the outreach? Whom do we reach? What are the stakeholders that we can connect to further? How to connect it better with the ministries, with the countries, with the regions that we're active in. So this is probably where we felt that the EG digitalization could be improved. For the ASEM Compendium for Higher Education, it is absolutely, well, necessary, I might say, and useful, but of course it's not complete yet. As Marily said in her presentation, there's need for further input. 18 countries are still missing. For the ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub, I almost felt it's in the green part. It's very useful. It's very lively. It's a rather recent initiative. I mean, not the initiative itself, but the I have to say, like the restart probably with the colleagues from Ireland. I think you had a recent conference just last year. Yeah, so I would put it keep. Thank you. And we feel that this is an initiative that is worth connecting with when it comes to looking at the other working groups and expert groups and initiatives, because it is such a crucial and I think I got this right, rather well-funded initiative also. I think those are probably all the points I can see here and that I remember. Again, don't shoot the messenger. I humbly apologize if you were a bit too critical maybe compared to the other two groups, but I mean, it's in the interest of improvement. Thank you.
Not at all, no need to apologize. Thank you very much, Sebastian in Group 3 for this very constructive and comprehensive feedback. I think it was very useful to identify some working points because there are so many things that could be improved. Nothing is perfect yet. And we believe that the strategy and action plan can be a turning point in the ASEM education process, which is also why we organized these brainstorming session and gave you the possibility to be critical. So, or we won't shoot the messenger. Okay, on this note, I think we can almost conclude this meeting. I'll just finish by a very short overview of what's next. So as I mentioned in my introduction, this is the first workshop of a series of 4. So there are still 3 workshops remaining, one on the 3 remaining strategic objectives, and registration are still open. So if you're interested in you haven't registered yet, you can still do so. So I hope to see some of you again in the upcoming weeks. The event was recorded and the recording will be available in a few days on our website, the communication channels. We will send it to you by email. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, the brainstorming session will not be part of the recording because we wanted to keep your exchanges private to make sure that you could speak freely. Of course, if you are willing, we could share the whiteboards with the different participants because maybe that's interesting for them to have a look at. The PowerPoint presentations of the speaker will also be shared. And if any of you have additional questions, be it for us or for any of the speakers, feel free to contact us using the email address on the screen. So info@asem-education.org. On these words, I would like to conclude our first workshop. Thank our speakers, moderators, for their contributions and excellent work. Thank you, all of you, for your active participation and flexibility. I know we are quite a bit behind schedule, so thank you for sticking with us until the end. And I would like to wish you a very nice day or wonderful evening. Bye-bye.